Hi, we're David and Michaela Colkin, and we are going to talk to you today a little bit about mental illness, OCD, and how we have worked together through our communication to help each other along our journey.
And one thing we found when we talk about this topic is using metaphors to kind of explain our experience, because it allows us in a concise way to talk about something that's really abstract and complex in a meaningful and practical way. So a metaphor we've often used is traveling, because we like traveling. And when we think about our life experience with, especially living and thriving with OCD, it kind of makes sense. And so one of the first things is, in terms of if we were planning our trip, we would link that to our experience early in our marriage when we were, we fell in love. I was in the military at the time, and we were enjoying ourselves, and we didn't live with one another, so we didn't know each other's idiosyncrasies.
So it's kind of like packing our suitcase for the trip.
Exactly. And the thing is, we weren't aware, like most couples, what baggage we were bringing into the relationship. But it became quickly apparent that one particular baggage that I had was what we later knew to be OCD, but we didn't know it at the time. And it would manifest itself with me giving you brief lists at the end of each day, telling you all the details of my day.
Every single one.
Yeah. And that was based on a fear we found out later, because a fear that I would lose quality, I would be responsible for poor quality of communication on our marriage, which would result in divorce. And so there was some fact there, but it wasn't realistic.
So once we packed our suitcase and we were ready to go on our trip, we had to go through TSA, security. And so we found that as we got to know each other more, we started to wonder what was normal for just a marriage and getting to know each other, and what was abnormal. And so we thought, well, is this something that we need to have marriage counseling? Do we need to go to a therapist? All sorts of questions popped into our mind about what was going on. As Dave said, he would brief me up to an hour after work every day. Do you remember your little brief list? Well, it wasn't, it was on a little piece of paper, but your writing was so small. And if I interrupted just a little bit of it, Dave would have to start all over again with that brief list, which wasn't a lot of fun.
No. And a lot of what I talked about in the brief list were intrusive thoughts that I got, and they had disturbed me from my teenage years. And think of any taboo thought that or topic that you can think of, and I had that. And I think the important thing was I realized that it became an identity crisis, because it forced myself to ask myself, if I have these thoughts, does that make me a bad person? And how can I be a good person? Type of thing.
So it was like we were delayed at the gate a little bit, waiting for this plane that would never come, and we were just finding that things were getting more and more challenging. I realize now how much I accommodated your OCD, just because I didn't want to have to go along with the cycle with you, so I would sit and listen to your brief list. Right. I would do little things so that it would hopefully not make the cycle go quite as long. But we noticed that there was turbulence, so we finally got on that plane, and there was definitely some turbulence going on.
Yes, and I think a couple of things happened that made us aware that, okay, this has gone too far. I mean, one is we both knew, I think, intuitively that, hey, if this isn't sustainable, divorce is around the corner if we don't do something about it. And the other thing was, it was taking up so much time, at least from my point of view, that I was focused almost all day on this stuff, and it prevented me from being a husband to you and being a friend to others. And the only thing at work was so structured in the military, it was easy to hide behind those routines. in uniforms and ranks, etc. But at the end of the day, we definitely came to a decision. We were at that gate and we had to make that decision.
And so there was definitely some turbulence in that Dave had to make some decisions. At the time that he was in the military, it was looked down upon if you got help, especially if you had medicine, any kind of medication. And so we had to have that conversation of, are we willing to give up certain parts of Dave's work life in order for us to be together as a married couple?
Yeah.
And so we did decide, yes, it was important to get help, and yes, it was important for that medication. Now, medication's not for everybody. There are other therapies that a person can do to help with their mental illness, but that was something that we found that Dave needed to just kind of dull the OCD a little bit in his head. Another thing that we did, and I would say that took us 7 years to realize that OCD was in our relationship. And so we use a lot of humor. We've named our OCD. His name is Herb. Herb is not a nice person, but we can joke about it now. I can say, I really don't like Herb. He needs to go away. And that's kind of Dave's way of knowing that he's doing it, that he's cycling. But it wasn't always that easy to trust when I said you were cycling, was it?
No, and that's the key. It took time to build up, we call it that bank of civility, that trust that if you tell me that I'm cycling and having obsessive thoughts and trying to do compulsive behaviors in response to that, I have to believe you. And it was hard to do it at the beginning. But through therapy and whatnot, and thinking about it and reflection, we're able to get to that point. And I think that was the other point, is that it took us a while to find a therapist who would help us in the meaning that able to help us, because not everyone is qualified to help people with OCD or able to have the experience. And so we were lucky and found someone who could help us and help us reflect on our experiences, and that meant the difference, I think.
Well, and I think it's important when you're looking for a therapist. People have asked us, well, what if my spouse doesn't want to go to therapy? I'd say it's still okay for one person, one partner, to go to therapy. Hopefully the other person will join. We're blessed that both of us were willing to go to therapy. Started out as marriage counseling, and then what we found was it was helpful for me to go to some individual sessions, and for Dave to go to some individual sessions, and then for us to go at the same time. Because then our psychologist, our therapist, had heard both sides, for lack of a better way of putting it, and then she could bring us together and help us both understand this mental illness, Herb, just a little bit more.
And it was important for us, I think, because in the process, we didn't go in there knowing I had OCD. We just knew there was a problem, but we couldn't define it. Once, pretty quickly, she was able to diagnose me with OCD. That meant a lot, because then we're able to identify our enemy, so to speak, put a name to it, Herb, and do something about it, learn more about the disorder, and actually help ourselves. So that was really enabled us to start that landing process,
Now, I will say, no offense to anybody named Herb out there. I do feel like I need to say that.
Yeah.
The reason why we chose that name is because Dave's mom liked to cook a lot, and she would always use her herbs in her food. So that's why we chose that name, and it worked for us. But you're right, with the landing part, things aren't roses and flowers and fluffy pink ponies even today. There is help out there. You can work to get your help and your assistance, but that OCD isn't always a big part of our marriage. We find it kind of waxes and wanes. When things are very stressful, we know that OCD is going to come out, that Herb is going to come out. But there are a lot of times that the OCD is kind of dormant in a way.
Right.
And we just deal with it. So it's not all perfect, and we're not trying to come out here saying that we are a perfect couple, we figured this out. We still have our turbulence, our rocky moments, but we've kind of landed in a place where we're dealing with it. We're working with it,
Yeah.
and we're not allowing it to define Dave, and we're not allowing it to define our marriage, which I think is pretty important.
Oh yeah, and I think another thing is being aware of what we need at a time. You know, what's required in our marriage. And so, for example, we realized quite early on after the diagnosis that there were plenty of resources for someone like me with the diagnosis. I could get medication. I could go through exposure and response prevention therapy, but there wasn't much for people like you who are, you know, how do I know if I'm accommodating this person? Are there support groups? Because living with someone with OCD, as you know, is not easy.
Right.
And so, and often people with OCD have comorbid disorders. And so there's really a need for that, the source of resources for people, family members. And we couldn't find it. You know, we went to work groups, we went to other therapists, and right. So I think one thing we found is we started collecting our notes, and we just after you know, I studied about it and thought about it in graduate school, we decided to write a book, and I think that helped out.
And the intent of the book was to help, or is to help, other people who are in similar situations. I don't think you even necessarily need to have OCD in your marriage to have assistance from the book. But I'd say it was a little cathartic for us as well to write it, because it really took us to some dark places of our marriage.
Yes.
When we were first finding out about the OCD. So what we want to say is don't give up. There are resources out there. And something I wanted to ask you about, I know that you cycle, and you still cycle to this day. What are some things that are helpful for you that I, as your partner, do when you're cycling?
I think the biggest thing is communication and telling me how you're feeling and letting me know what you're observing. And when you have that level of trust, then that means I don't take it as a judgment. I take it as you're coming from a place of love, a good place, and giving me some constructive feedback so that I can take action and we can move forward together. That's a big difference from the earlier on in our marriage when it was, you're telling me what to do, you're telling me I'm wrong, and confirming or validating my sense of a poor negative image of myself. Now I can, having reflected on my identity and who I am, and realizing I'm not a bad person, I just happen to have OCD with some of these intrusive thoughts, that I can move forward as a good person.
So one thing that, as I've researched and we've read about pure O,
Right.
and you have pure O for OCD, which means that you have a lot more obsessions. When you go out, people don't necessarily see you performing rituals because it's all in your head.
Right.
So what are some things that help you in your cycles to break the cycle when you are having those, we call them intrusive thoughts? Was some things that help you to break those cycles?
I think for me, one thing is exercise, physical exercise. I'm kind of wired that way to, it helps relieve natural stresses, and so that helps. That's a big thing. Another thing is meditation. I do what I call contemplative prayer, and what it allows me to do is kind of visualize my stresses, my worries, obsessive thoughts, whatever's bothering me. I almost watch them float by me in a kind of disconnected way, and that is gives me relief because it allows me to realize I'm not part of them, and then I can make my own decisions. And so, and it gives me a sense of peace, so that during the day, if I do have a cycle or whatever, I can recall that by touching myself on the chest, or just saying a quick prayer or whatever, and just remembering that sense of peace. And that's been really helpful for me. But there are plenty of people who don't have that puro, that have those physical routines. And so, but it's the same process. What are your needs? What are your requirements? And what makes you relaxed? And how can you tap into that?
Well, and I think we had mentioned that a lot of times when there's stress, when there are big life events going on, that's when I hear your obsessive thoughts more as you're sharing them with me.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that oftentimes I will say to you, Herb, you got to go, you got to leave. And there have been times that I'm so done with the OCD, and notice that I keep saying done with the OCD, not done with Dave, but I'm just so done with the obsessive thoughts that sometimes I just tune Dave out. And I just sit in silence. And I know that causes you angst because I'm not responding, because what you're looking for is assurance.
Right.
Am I a good person? I had that thought. So I think it's helpful too that I don't feed into it when it's happening as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and that's really the key, is someone I love and trust who's in this with me, but also I'm here for you too. And that I sometimes am selfish in that regard, but that's why I'm grateful we did write the book together, because your voice needs to be heard too.
Well, we thank you for listening and watching this today. We are available via our Facebook page. We have Twitter. If you have any questions, you can absolutely reach out to us via our website. And just remember, you are not in this alone. There is always a way that you can get assistance and help. And whereas we're not perfect, we just want you to know that there is hope. So do not give up.